Before becoming Prime Minister of India, Dr. Manmohan Singh made his name as an economist, teaching at the Delhi School of Economics, working at the United Nations Trade and Development in Geneva. He also studied at Oxford, Cambridge, was governor of the RBI, vice chairperson of the Planning Commission. So here really was a human being who came from a very strong academic foundation. And to talk a bit about his legacy as an economist, we've spoken so much about his time as Prime Minister, about his innings as a politician. But to speak about his legacy as an economist, I'm joined by leading economist Dr. Rathin Roy. Dr. Roy, welcome. You would have been a young economist growing up when Dr. Singh was Chief Economic Advisor, then at the Planning Commission, Finance Ministry, and ultimately Prime Minister. Looking in the rearview mirror, what do you think is the most important economic legacy Dr. Singh leaves India with?
Thank you, Rahul. I must confess that I have two things in common with Dr. Singh. We went to the same college in Cambridge, and he did once take me out for dinner. Not when the economic crisis had happened, just before, when he was in Geneva with the South Commission. And neither of us worked for the World Bank or the IMF, unlike most economists. We both worked for the UN. And therefore, I think I would say that he left behind two economic legacies which have not been commented on. I'm sure many people have commented on many things. Getting India out of its first existential crisis, the nuclear deal, etc. But it wasn't that. You see, Dr. Singh had this amazing ability to lead and therefore to develop teams that would work under his leadership, deliver results. And that started in 1974, when India was facing very high inflation. He was chief economic advisor, and he managed to get inflation under control. Then when he was in the Reserve Bank of India, all that you see in terms of reforms of India's financial system today started when he commissioned a report by Professor Sukumar Chakrabarty on the working of the Indian financial system, whose implementation over the next 10 or 15 years has led to India having a modern financial system. And so on and so forth. But it's quite remarkable if you look at his ability to work with economists older than him. Arjun Sengupta, I.G. Patel, Baricha Minhas, economists who were his contemporaries, Dr. Rangarajan, Dr. Vijay Kelkar, economists who were junior to him, Dr. Raghuram Rajan, Dr. Kaushik Basu, Dr. Monte Kaluvalia. He was able to work with all of them to deliver results for India. And that is the hallmark of a true policy leader. I think, therefore, his legacy, which is unfortunately not being taken up by any of his successors, was to act and behave like a leader in the policy domain and to get others to work with him. That requires two things, which he had in abundance. It requires great confidence in your own technical and analytical capabilities, which he had in good measure. And it requires a very large ego to be able to work with others and give them credit. And he did both. And I think that would be his most important legacy, to the fact that until very recently, India's economy was regarded to be in very competent and capable hands, multiple competent and capable hands. That is a legacy, unfortunately, which has been tarnished now, but that is what I will remember him by.
Dr. Roy, his critics would say he was an overrated economist and underrated politician. Just looking at, his dissertation on Indian exports and trade, and looking just at his academic ability as an economist, where would he stand? You mentioned a lot of his peers, some juniors as well. Where would he stand in your esteem as an economist?
But you see, his academic career, in fact, like mine, was very short. It's a rite of passage in economics. You go into academia, you get tenure, and then if you want to do other more interesting things, you leave. So as an economist, he did what academic economists stop at, which is he was competent in his plumbing, in his use of technical tools, and he had developed a good analytical capabilities. But as an economic policy practitioner, what I call tradecraft of economic policy and practice, he was hugely successful. I think also, if I may, Rahul, this binary that I know my own community of economists use, bad economist, better politician, I think it's false. I think he was a good economist because he had no illusions about being a politician. He was what I call unelectable. There have been many in our history, unelectables, but unlike today's unelectables, and unlike some unelectables in his own party, his domain expertise and his ability to crisis manage and to deliver prosperity was why he was put in a job. So he was crystal clear. He became finance minister because India was in the middle of an existential financial crisis and he had to resolve that. He did that with the Prime Minister's full cooperation and the inputs of many others whom he himself has acknowledged. Job well done. He was appointed as Prime Minister in 2004, not because he was electorally, any one day, but because he was deemed to be the only person who could actually manage a diverse political coalition and deliver results. He was lucky, in my view, in only one respect. Everyone needs a bit of luck, but he made the most of it, which is in 2004, well, for a long time, the Congress Party had lost its ideology. It had no ideology at all. And he was not a threat to anybody. So he was able to use his economic credentials to deliver an ideological approach to the party, which has been responsible for the much of the prosperity India saw. And again, never forget, manage crises for India very capably, very effectively. He then branched out and used that domain expertise to make the most of his foreign policy background, both in the South Commission and in the UN, and delivered us a nuclear deal and much better relations with our neighbors than we unfortunately have now. These, I think, are what made him, I think, one of India's foremost practitioners of economic policy tradecraft. And therefore, I think the economist-politician binary is wrong. And it's not really relevant. I mean, sure, he was good. So are thousands of professors in thousands of universities all over the world. There are as many professors as there are probably IAS officers in India. One doesn't remember any of them for being professors or IAS officers. One does remember Dr. Manmohan Singh, and his portrait hangs in St. John's College, in the hall in St. John's College, not because he was professor of something, but because he was one of the world's foremost practitioners of economic policy, more in the tradition of Keynes, the economist in Treasury, who never held an academic job in economics, than in the tradition of, more run-of-the-mill academics from universities that you hear about and forget in a minute.
Now let's spend a moment on the contradictions between the time when he served in a socialist era as chief economic advisor from 1972 to 76, as RBI governor from 82 to 85, and then as finance minister from 91 onwards when he becomes a champion of free trade. The point would be that under a more socialist regime, he kept his free trade instincts at bay, and therefore was he an economist and also therefore an opportunist in that regard.
The distinction there, Rahul, is he was absolutely clear why he was hired and what is the job that he had to do. And that clarity very often is lacking in my tribe. He was hired as chief economic advisor to solve a problem of very high inflation. He was not hired to deliver prosperity to the Indian economy. He did that with a team very successful. He was not hired to speak contrary to the prevailing political ideology of the day. And therefore, he did not, which was, protectionism, no free trade, etc. But in 1991, when his job demanded that he embrace free trade to save India from an existential crisis, he did it. It is not as if he was a rabid free marketer. He repeatedly said that India will have to have a public sector and a private sector that coexists. However, he had realized that India could no longer afford the luxury of no free trade, of high amounts of industrial licensing, and the rent-seeking and corruption that came with that. So he opened up the economy to good effect. And he was non-doctrinal enough to understand that the India being treated like a nuclear pariah was one of the biggest obstacles to India's transformative prosperity. And therefore, he put his political capital there, and he managed to get the nuclear deal, at least signed, if not fully implemented. And that actually showed his results-oriented approach. And that is what you want from an unelectable prime minister. You want an effective policy practitioner who is results-oriented. And he has given us enough examples in his lifetime of achieving and delivering those successful results. So it doesn't really matter whether he was pro-free trade or anti-free. It's not like, are you pro-Hindutva, do you like Muslims or not? That is not how economics works. You have a job to do, you go out there and do it in the circumstances of your time. And in that respect, he did it very well. And he had no pretensions. He had no pretensions to being a politician. If you read Sanjay Baru's book, he says that. He says, I do not want to get political credit. I want to get credit for doing the job that I did do, and I don't want people going around saying it's all due to the great Honorable Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. He had a very big ego, in short, which is what is woefully lacking today.
You know, his career was also a technocrat's dream. So many different capacities across so many decades in different parts of government, and then ultimately rising to the apex of becoming prime minister. You know, for young technocrats looking at the murky world of Indian politics, you know, A, he was able to attract excellent talent, and B, you know, what do you think is the legacy that he leaves behind? Because was it just a lot of luck and opportunity that came at the right moment? I mean, ultimately, the job of finance minister was offered to Patel before it was offered to Manmohan Singh. IG Patel refused, which is why he came in. So is this just a lot of happenstance and coincidence and good luck?
No, I don't think so. But to the extent, yes, India was a newly evolving independent country. It was therefore possible in those days to appoint a chief economic advisor who was just 40 years old. I remember him once saying to me many years later that a chief economic advisor should never be older than 50. Because if you understand how the finance ministry works, the chief economic advisor may hold the rank of secretary to government, but they only run one division in the Department of Economic Affairs. And therefore, you can't have ego hassles with the IAS who basically run the government of India. So if you're 40, 42, you don't have those ego hassles. If you have the great gift of being able to listen to a politician and persuade them to do something that you want done, which he had in spades, then I think that is a huge mark of success. So what I would tell technocrats is leave the econometrics, etc., to university professors and plumbers. You can hire them. Learn from him how to be results focused, understand why you have a particular job and what it is you need to do to deliver results in that job, just like any other job, and then apply your skills to build teams to do that job without expecting to be treated like a politician with their own political base and power. What he teaches, I think, all policy practitioners is our kicks in life are different. His kicks in life are very different from Narendra Modi's. His kicks in life do not come from the adulation of the masses or any kind of brown nosing or being called a Vishwa Guru or great scholar. His kicks in life came from doing a job and doing it well, completing and finishing it. That requires political skills, that requires analytical abilities, that requires ability to build and lead teams. And these are the skills I think that policy practitioners going forward need to have in spades. And what we can all learn from him is how to get them. Was he an opportunist? Did he play games? Yes, of course he did. Politics is a dirty business, as is the business of policy. It's a dog-eat-dog profession. But he had a very positive attitude to it, which I'd like to share. One day, he asked somebody, I think it was either Montek or somebody else in the 90s, to do something. No, it was in the RBI in the 80s. Three or four people were asked to do something. The next morning, he had come with a paper where that thing was done. Another economist asked him, why did you do it? We were all asked to do it. He said, oh, you should never yield space. When you're given a chance to do something and you can do it, then occupy that space and do it well so you're recognized. So in that very positive sense, he did not yield space to others, but you will never find anyone grudging him that because he was generous with his credit. And many who worked with him, unlike many who followed those who worked with him, rose to positions of great eminence and capability in the fullness of time.
Well, in a very short span in this remembrance, you've covered a lot of ground. Dr. Rathin Roy, for joining us with your thoughts. Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Thank you.